Servus, Matthias here, and this is Singletrack. You all know Tailwind Nutrition by now, and if you don't, well, you should. Tailwind is the Singletrack endurance fuel of choice and proud sponsor of the Rock Candy Running Virtual Vert Challenge. We'll have tons of Tailwind to raffle off, so head on over to rockcandyrunning.com and sign up to race and chase some vert with us. Remember, the Virtual Vert Challenge is the race with the crazy formula that counts miles, vert, and the number of hills you climb. And Tailwind is the endurance fuel that will power you on throughout all your incredible adventures and help you recover after them. Check the show notes for a link and promo code on your first order. And now, to our special guest for this week. The first person I have had on the show that has her own Wikipedia page, I think. UTMB winner, FKT chaser, book author, and that's what interested me the most, race director of the much beloved and by now historic Chuckanut 50 in Bellingham, Washington. Here is Krissy Moehl. I was just talking this week with Daniel Probst from the Mount Baker Ultra. I don't know if you know him personally. He lives in Bellingham too. Yeah. And he said he ran Tor and that inspired him to become the race director and try to bring Mount Baker Ultra sort of onto the scene, even though it's somewhat of a different race, but this idea of sort of taking something and making big. And so I just love being inspired by it.
Oh, right on.
You've raced in Europe, you've raced over here, you've raced all over the world. In the US, you're a race director in Bellingham. How do you see the difference between the races in Europe and the races over here?
Well, I guess you made the mention that it's been a while since I've been over there, so fair enough to note when my perspective is taking place.
That is very true.
Yeah, it has definitely grown. The sport as a whole has grown in the last 2 decades that I've been traveling back and forth and all over the country and world to get to do these things. I just remember my very first impression being in awe of the way the Europeans just embrace endurance sport, and like the streets being lined with people and cheering us on. And having been a race director in Bellingham prior to actually kind of simultaneously with going over to Europe, it was kind of crazy to be fighting to be able to put on an event with permits and insurance and police and all the local jurisdictions trying to get an event together. Where over there, I've learned that the town's paid to have the event come through. The locals are outside cheering at all hours of the night. I remember running through the rain in 2003, climbing out of, I believe it was Courmayeur, and there were people all along the street yelling and cheering and in sweatpants or whatever. And this just would not happen at home. And that was probably 3 or 4 years into my own ultra career, pacing, running, doing all sorts of things. So I was just immediately enamored with the love for endurance sport especially in Europe, but also I experienced a similar level in Japan and then also China. Mm-hmm. So there's something really precious about that. And I think it has only amplified in the recent years.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I have to tell my listeners that I did not plan this, but Daniel in a previous episode echoed the same thing, that over there it's the towns who live off of tourism. They want these events to come and they pay organizers to put on a race. Over here, you fight with permits, and we just had the same topic, the same sentiment in a previous show. It's funny that you bring it up too, because yes, it is always an interesting challenge in trying to put on a race. For you, for Chuckanut, it's so established, and Bellingham is known to embrace sporting events. You don't run into issues for you to get a permit for your race.
I definitely have to stay on it. I am now looking at, I think I counted the other day, 6 permits because of all the different lands that we cross. And I believe with the recent changes through the pandemic, there's been, well, I just noticed, honestly, not just believe, but I've just noticed that the required paperwork and insurance forms and health and safety plans, they're all like stepping up in degree of involvement, like how many pages, like literal pages of paperwork I'm filling out. All the forms are still, like, some are becoming online, some are still printed PDF and fill it out. So we're just in this like interesting age of like technology and transitioning where this is my 20th year of race directing. And I remember filling out a 1-page form by hand and dropping it off at the city hall to have it, stamped, and I'd pay a check for maybe $20. It is way different than that now.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that you have 6 jurisdictions, but it makes sense because you actually have a very unique race. Considering the North American scene trying to tie us back sort of into this Europe conversation, because you actually have a start and finish in town, which is rare.
Well, we start and finish at the Fairhaven Park, so just I guess we're still within city limits. So yes, because we do the city of Bellingham is one of my permits, and that park is a big piece of that. So,
I'd call it. Yeah, it's not like downtown Bellingham. It's not like you're not running down Main Street, but it's not the way it is for a lot of other races where you just sort of start at a dirt gravel trailhead somewhere in the middle of the woods, which is great too. I'm not judging it, right? But
I love those events.
Exactly. So let's pull back a little bit. And I might have to come back to UTMB because I have so many questions. But let's talk a little bit about Chuckanut. You have been the race director for 20 years, which is crazy to think about for me personally, because I'm been only in the country for 21 years. I didn't even know that the sport existed back then, and you've been already the race director. And the race started several years beforehand. So why don't you take us down a little bit memory lane and tell us a little bit about how the race got started, what was it, how it was the early days, and how you then took over?
There is a little video on the Chuckanut 50K website that Noah Bennett produced for us for the 25th running of the event. And there's a great interview with Doug that kind of narrates most of it. Mm-hmm. So you get like the true sense. Doug McKeever and Richard West started the Chuckanut 50K in 1993. And like a lot of ultras, it was, an invitation to some of their friends. And Doug loves telling the story that the night before, these 20 people were coming up from like Seattle and Bellingham and maybe a couple down from Vancouver. He called the parks and said, "Hey, by the way, we're going to have an event tomorrow." And a little different than prepping months in advance and taking registration fees and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's just evolved from there. And he's the first to correct me that the original Chuckanut 50K course could not be run anymore because a lot of it was run on roads.
Oh, okay.
The course has morphed a little bit, and it morphed pretty quickly to something that is pretty closely represented in what we're doing now. Yeah. Utilizing the inner urban, Fragrance Lake, Cleator Road, the big Ridge Loop, Lost Lake, and back on down Fragrance Lake Road and Trail, and then back on the inner urban. That makes sense to people that have run the course, maybe not somebody that's just hearing that for the first time. But a lot of our great local Chuckanut trails are incorporated into this pretty classic event. I was told, I have not confirmed, but I was told that this was the first ultra in the state of Washington. So it is 30 years old now. This will be our 28th running because we missed putting on the event in 2020. We hosted a virtual event in 2021, but as far as counting in-person events, this will be our 28th running. And I guess a little bit more of the history is that Doug and Richard put it on for 10 years, and I ran my first ultra at the Chuckanut 50K in the year 2000, and then I ran it again in 2002, which was their last year, and I think the race is always run the third weekend of March, and by the end of that summer, nobody had said they would take on the event. So myself and my husband at the time decided to take on the event, and we produced the event in 2003, and then I have kept it going since and have had some amazing team members all along the way, people helping, co-race directing. My mother and a man named Steve Loitz and Doug McKeever have been present at every single Chuckanut in some capacity. Yeah. And I've had a great team with Tyler Pooley and Kevin Douglas the last, I think we decided it's been 5 years, and 2 of those being pandemic years. These guys have really stepped up and made it more of a team effort. And this year we joined with Pacific Multisports. Actually, we joined them last year for our virtual event, and they've jumped in, and it's kind of cool how the team continues to grow to put on this community event.
Yeah. I mean, that was amazing. That gave literally the full overview. I think I asked, I want to like put a couple pins in. I think I asked on the Seattle Mountain Running Facebook group a few weeks ago about which ultra is the oldest in the Pacific Northwest, and I think there is a super old one up in Vancouver too, and I forget the name of it. And then there is a really old one that doesn't exist anymore, that I think started in 91, but that it wasn't continuously running. So you're definitely one of the oldest. And I think what's interesting is I ran it, I think for the 25th anniversary. I think I came up and ran it. And it's interesting because especially now when you go on Instagram, you see people training specifically for the race, and they always talk about the middle 18. I think that's what it's called. Right? It is a unique race because you have that interurban trail that is fairly flat and fairly fast running to get into it, right? Into the actual sort of mountainous terrain.
Yeah, I love that piece. There's a great story that I think that encapsulates that. When Jeff Rose and Michael Smith ran the race together, and Michael was I believe he ran like a 2:17 marathon, and Jeff Rose in his heyday just crushing any trail race that he did. And the curiosity was, with the flat 12 miles, essentially flat 12 miles along the interurban, 6 at the beginning and 6 at the end, would it be the speedy marathoner or the mountain ultra guy? And it was such a cool duel to watch those guys duke it out. And in the end, Michael led most of the race. Jeff caught him on the descent off the ridge, so coming down Fragrance Lake Road. That year we came down the road. Yeah. And then held on to the lead all the way to the finish along the interurban. So just to have that kind of turnover at the end was pretty incredible. And we've had some amazing speedsters since. There was a funny story when Hayden Hawk ran, where he wore some road flats and just lost all sorts of time to Max King up on the ridge because he needs some traction along those slippery rocks, as you know.
Yeah.
And coming along the interurban, he was, I'd have to look back at stats, but I want to say he was between 3 and 5 minutes behind Max at the last aid station, which is 6 miles from the finish. And he came within 30 seconds of Max King. So both of those guys were running sub 6 minute pace on that last course. If you've got turnover, you can really make up some time on the interurban. But yeah, so just definitely a unique course in that it really can play to whatever strength you want, and it really helps to train both, really, to have that leg turnover, especially at the end, but also be able to make short order of like some of the more technical trails that the ridge offers.
Yeah, this is very amazing and unique, and something that I didn't anticipate when I came up running. And for somebody who considers himself slow on the flats and enjoys the mountains, I was very much like dreading the last 6 miles back into town. I was like, is this still going on? This was a long one for me. But let's talk a little bit about the race. You have a couple of very interesting things. One, it's an early season race, so you have a lot of focus on your race because it's early season. It's a good tune-up race. It's in March. So a lot of runners come up to run it as sort of their season opener, right?
Yeah, that's been that way for decades. I've always got the pushback from people that say, oh, I've been skiing all winter, I'm not in shape yet. And so it's kind of, even back in the day before the race calendar filled, 12 months a year, this was kind of the first race of the year. It's a little different now because people can go all around the entire year if they want. But yeah, the kind of the rust buster mentality, test the legs out, see where your fitness is at. What did you maintain over the winter, or just good kickoff race for the year, or kind of a motivator to keep you training through the winter. That's, I think, a lovely thing about living in the Pacific Northwest. But it's dark and rainy. You can, temperature-wise, train on dirt pretty much year-round here. So if you do want to put in some time, you can be ready for the Chuckanut. And we, through the virtual year, we created these segments. So running basically aid station to aid station. So the distance from the start to aid station 1, the length of the interurban, about 6 miles. That was segment 1. Aid station 1 to 2 was about 4 miles with 1,200 feet of climbing. Over to $2, that was segment 2, and on through the course. And we set it up so that you ran those 6 segments in January, and then we split it into 2, so the out and back on the interurban, and then, as you mentioned, the middle 18. So do those 2 segments in February, and there you go. You've run the course twice in the 2 months, hopefully with some additional training as well. You can be ready for the 50K in March.
Yeah. Well, and nowadays, when all the top runners are switching to ski mountaineering, the whole excuse, or I've been skiing all winter, it doesn't count anymore. Now it's, you better be skiing all winter. If you want to compete on the highest level, then you better put on skis. Having said this, here in the Pacific Northwest, as you say, with low elevation mountains, I mean, we don't get enough snow on our neighborhood trails to really consider that an option.
Right.
So the other thing that you have going for yourself is that you're not just the oldest ultra, you're also one of the largest, right? And that is interesting here in the US at least, right? I mean, you are what are signups for this year?
This year we have 600 people registered. We've finished in the high 400s. So we have, I think because of what our last topic, just being a early season race, we do have a pretty high attrition rate, and we do our best to pull in as many off the wait list as we can to fill up to what our permit is allowing. So I would like to get closer. We've typically had our permit at 500. So this year, actually 2020, we had a permit for 600. So now again, and we did not get to run that race. So we're hopeful having the 600 person permit. This year we'll be in the 500s for finishing. But the races are growing. Another big change. Chuckanut used to be in the top 3 of size in the U.S., and I don't know if that still stands. I have to look back at some Ultra Runner magazine stats.
When we talk ultras in the US, we so often only talk the big races, think of the big races in distance. We only talk about sort of the 100-mile distance, right? And so Chuckanut sometimes doesn't show up on the radar for people because it's just a 50K.
It's so funny, just a 50K. That's 31 miles with 5,000 feet of gain. It's such a ultra runner speak, isn't it?
I know it. No, it is. It's true. Like, but I feel like I don't know if that is because Western states is sort of the preeminent race in the country, and that's 100-miler that everybody who wants to run ultras and wants to put on an ultra is gunning for the 100-mile distance, so they can hand out buckles. But races don't have to have that distance.
Right.
Did you ever feel like with Chuckanut, I mean, you've been doing it so many years, did you ever feel like to offer another distance? Was it ever a thought process?
Oh, it's definitely been a lot of other people's thought process.
Oh, okay. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked for that. And I'm not sure why. I didn't have like really a rational reason. It was more of a gut feel of this was the event that I inherited, and this is the event I'll continue to produce. And I guess we've considered doing things over the weekend, so having maybe an event on Sunday, or a shorter kids event. But whoever's involved have come back to just putting on the classic. And for better or worse, I know there is great benefit to showing those shorter distances to the trail running community, like having those options to then grow the longer distance. I just really love putting on the 50K. And I'm kind of there's people that have made careers out of being race directors and putting on multiple events a year. That's another thing I've been pushed, or not, I guess pushed isn't the right word, but like encouraged to do, is like put on other events. I just love putting everything into this one event and then taking a break from it for the rest of the year. And then, September, October, start firing up again and getting to spend the winter focusing on putting on this pretty special event, having had it been my first ultra and getting to carry it forward. And I remember at 24 taking over the event and thinking, man, if I do this 20 years, I'll be 44. Here we are. Now I'm 44. So it's been probably one of the most consistent things in my life. And I love keeping it like, it's hard to say that it's simple by that it's just the one distance. It might even be easier to put on. It wouldn't be exponential work to put on more events along with it, but I do like maybe we'll call it the purity of just doing the 50K.
Yeah, there's something to be said about keeping some. It requires a lot of restraint in a sense, right? Because once you have the organizational structure laid out, it's so easy to just say, well, I've already bought all the water canisters for the aid stations, right? I might as well roll them out 3 or 4 times a year. So I get this, I get the sort of practical sentiment, but I also hear that to keep it pure like that is makes the event special, right? It's almost, I mean, you fight perhaps do you fight boredom when putting on yourself, perhaps because you have so much time in between? You don't?
No, you say keeping it special. I think that's the thing, is I get to put everything into, and I had a great conversation on Trail Runner Nation. We brought on David Horton, and I got to be a part of the interview side as opposed to interviewee side. And Horton and I both agreed that putting on a race up to 100 kilometers, he can speak to that better. I've only done the 50K, but it is more exhausting to put on an event than it is to run an event. So I definitely dive in and put all my energy and make it a big deal and keep it special by doing that once a year. Like, I don't know that I would have the capacity to then turn around and do it again. It would become too turnkey. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm trying to avoid for myself.
Yeah. No, I can hear you. Then it becomes, I don't want to say cookie cutter, because I think we as individual race directors, I don't think we are in a place where that exists yet in ultra running. But I think there is the danger of getting into that. And back when you started, you were still very actively racing, which, I mean, if you become a race director early on, that would have also eaten up a lot of your time into actually training and racing yourself.
Yes, I agree with that.
All right. So Chuckanut is happening in about a month-ish. Where are you at in the organization piece? Take us into today's world of a race director. You're a month out. I mean, COVID obviously makes everything crazy. There was, I think, the worry that we had, I don't know, like 4 or 5 weeks ago, if with cases skyrocketing, if everything would get shut down again, right?
Oh my goodness, that would be so heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking in 2020, and to be putting our energies back into putting on the in-person. I am super optimistic and hopeful that we get to go all the way through and put the event on. I wouldn't say it's crazy. I would just say it's added, putting on an event amidst a pandemic has added a lot of layers. And I'm thankful for the community around me that's really rallying to help figure out the pieces. And again, Tyler and Kevin and Mark and Brooke from Pacific Multisports, just our little brain trust to be able to, pull together what we think can meet the requirements to put on a safe event, still enjoy the process, and bring together the community. It's kind of challenging because you're up against a lot of opinions, right? As it relates to the pandemic. And we opened registration December 3rd. So you got to rewind 2-3 months from now to realize where we were at that point, making that decision.
Yeah. And
at that point, we decided that everybody needed to be vaccinated. So in order to register, we asked that everybody vaccinated. Today, we're rolling out vaccine verification. So on their registration, each participant needs to update or by uploading their vaccination card so that we can see that they're all vaccinated. And we want to have that done before we bring people together, before we're, handing out race bibs, so that we can just have that box checked. And as it is, like, checking somebody in, there's already a line forming. So if you can imagine trying to check vaccination cards at the same time, just way better to have that all done ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I know we'll get we haven't gotten a ton of pushback, but there's been a little bit of pushback, and there might be more now that we're showing. We told them we would require proof. Now it's actually happening.
Yeah. So
we'll see how that unfolds. But that's definitely a layer to race directing that I didn't have to do even 18, or even 3 years ago, and not for the last 8 or 20. So, but we're all permits are in process. I've gotten the verbal yes from everyone. So now I'm just waiting for the, printed in hand copy, which is definitely a secure feeling having that, ready to go. Reservations are made with, tents and porta potties and trash and all of the things that need to show up and make that empty park become a race site. We're super stoked to have all of our sponsors back. Patagonia and Hoka and Hammer Nutrition are all back on board. And then we have Fairhaven Runners, Wander Brewing, Ultimate Direction, Trail Butter, and 2 new ones this year are Athletic Brewing, the non-alcoholic brews, and they will be giving non-alcoholic beers out at the finish line. We go to Wander for the post party, and then Route Line is a adventure van, like where you can rent adventure vehicles, and they're going to be on site. So some fun additions and some cool mainstays.
I applaud you that you went ahead and make it an event that requires vaccination. That's something that's been hotly debated among event organizers, far and wide, right? And especially because the situation is so fluid. As you said, you had to make that decision 3 months ago that's the direction you were heading into. Now it seems a little bit more obvious that would be smart, or that is smart. But 3 months ago, it was sort of a little bit of a leap of faith, because you wouldn't know what pushback you would be getting, and you wouldn't know if that would turn into a politically too contentious situation, if you will. So I applaud you that you went that route. It's good to see anyone, but especially big races, to make this the norm, because I think that will help people ease into that being just something that we need for a while, right?
We'll see how it plays out. Yeah, I definitely take the information as it comes, make the best decisions you can, and then do it again.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was talking with Gretchen Waller a few months ago, and we were talking about that one of the hard parts as a race director is that right now during this pandemic, we feel like the community aspect, sort of the heart, is not necessarily torn out, but it's sort of jeopardized because everything feels so awkward in coming together as a community. There are so many hoops you have to jump through, and I hope it's somewhat only something that we as race directors feel, and when the event actually happens, runners don't feel that. But it's something that we're thinking about, right? Because it used to be so easy. You could just have these shared bowls of M&Ms, which I guess in hindsight were always gross, right? But it sort of was this weird thing where it was so easy to come together as a community, and now it feels harder.
Harder in the sense of like permits or
not just. I feel like as a race director, when you have runners coming in through the finish line, are you going to give them a hug, or you just wave from 6 feet apart, right? We used to have these easy and obvious expressions of what it means to come together as a community, and we are told that these things are dangerous right now, right? And in some way they are, and it's difficult to. The race director try to forbid all of these or not have them at all, but you want to keep your people safe. So it's an interesting play of how to set something like this up.
Yep, and again, see how it plays out. Which reminds me, like, we are also requiring masks at the start and finish, and ideally, as people go through aid stations, our volunteers will be wearing them. We ask that our runners wear them so that everybody is respecting everybody else. COVID or otherwise, I don't want to come home from a race sick, or I think the same thing for travels anymore. So I guess I appreciate it from that standpoint. I really will have a hard time not hugging people. That is a piece of this event that has been a big part of just like my heart being there at the event. So we'll see how that goes. I guess I'm leaning on that we're outside, we're masked, we're hopefully we're all vaccinated. Like this can allow for some of that community vibe.
Yeah. No, it is sort of an interesting thing because, and there's obviously goes beyond even just putting on a race, right? That goes beyond everyday life. How we sort of are trying to reestablish what it means meeting friends for a beer and going out for dinner. So sort of these social life aspects, they have been torn away from us, and sort of having to reestablish them and bringing that stuff back is an interesting challenge and an interesting opportunity, because in some respects you don't want to have a race and just put it on as a formality. You want to bring the heart in. That's why you bring people together, right?
Totally. Yes. Yeah. This is not just, that's a really good point. And that kind of plays back into the why I only do one a year, is there's so much more to it than just putting on a race.
Amazing. So Chuckanut is happening. You are knee deep in preparations, but it is a well-oiled machine. You also have something else being about to be released. And why don't you tell about your second edition of your amazing book that's coming out?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was supposed to release January 11th, and it was stuck. It is current. Well, hopefully not anymore, but it was stuck on a boat on its way over here and got held up and got bumped out to March 8th. So 11 days prior to Chuckanut, the second edition of Running Your First Ultra is set to release. So a couple things happening. I also, in a personal sense, am also closing on a home. I've been living in my van for the last 18 plus months, and I'm excited to have a house to park my home. The van has been a super gift through this, and I'm also feeling very fortunate to be able to put down some roots here in the Bellingham community. Yeah. So a lot happening in a short amount of time. So all that prep work for the race, for book release, and home purchasing will all come to fruition right around the same time.
So busy. I'm glad to hear that the book is just delayed. I think I just read, I don't know if it was a couple big name cookbooks or so, but a couple books that were supposed to be released, they were all in a shipping container and they literally fell off the boat because of a storm, and they basically have to completely reprint. I don't know what books they were, but there were some big name books that were supposed to come out, and they literally fell into the ocean.
That was the holdup. My book was thought to have been in the ocean, but it's not. Mine was not in. It was on either the same ship or a ship of the same timing. And they didn't know for a couple of weeks whether it was in the water or not. That was kind of a rough hold. Yeah, that's so funny. I mean, it's not funny because I don't like the idea that they're are these other books that won't be released on time, or maybe have to be reprinted and are now trash in the ocean, which is another level. But yes, that was the concern for,
oh
gosh,
my
I
gosh.
think that was the early part of the year when I got that information. So
Okay.
it is, best I know, it is on its way. I have the advanced copy sitting on my desk here with me, and it's so cool to like see it alongside the previous edition. This one's a bit thicker. One of the more like significant updates to it was that every week that has a training plan, it is now mirrored with a blank training log. So encouraging people to track what they've done within the book. I always wanted it to be more of a manual where people like dog ear and put Post-it notes and tag it and fold over pages that are important so they remember, or tear out pages that they want to take with them to the race, or have this floppy manual like book in the car that they can reference whenever. So it's cool that has continued into the second edition. I also had the opportunity to rewrite the entire book, and I did. I probably, I don't even want to count how many times I went through the text, but definitely put my eyes on every word multiple times, rewriting the text, updating. I think one of the funnier versions was there's a part about equipment and gear where I talk about you might want to have space in your pack for your phone, your camera, and your GPS. And now there's one device that does all of that. So that was just 6 years ago that I was writing that text, and that our phones have evolved that much that we can just have one thing that we put in our pack that does all of those things for us. So, just some updates like that. I included a new chapter about longevity. So as I've entered my third decade of doing this and my fourth decade on the planet, I think, this long-term goal of sustainability in the sport, both physically and spiritually, longevity was a good chapter to add in. And I'm also really psyched that I brought in the voices of a lot of the current people that I'm connected to and I see as pillars in our sport. And they I solicited by asking them, what would you want to include in this book? But I didn't prompt them with what I wanted them to say. I just opened the door to whatever words they wanted to contribute. And so throughout the book, there's blurbs from about 20 athletes on their take on different aspects of training, racing, body image, however it, menstrual cycles, however it played into what they wanted to contribute. And it was really fun to plug those into the text and make it all flow.
Oh, that's fantastic. I do love, from the manual point of view, I do love that you have it in one book, because I know books similar to yours in terms of focus sometimes often offer a companion book where you sort of have the blank pages separate. But I like it that it's in one. I think that that works well for the person using it.
Yeah, and then hopefully they'll have seeing the training plan and then the reality of what they've done. And then when they go to prep for the next time doing that distance, not only do they have what I wrote, they have what they wrote, and they can make, adjustments to their training with those evolutions of their own work.
No, exactly. Then their training and their journaling becomes part of their story, which I think is super valuable, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I do. I agree, for sure.
Well, super. That's amazing. So we will have a link in the show notes to that book for pre-order. Probably to your website is easiest because there you have it listed all. Super. What else can we talk about? What is on your running calendar for this coming year? You are not just sage person who encourages other people to run. You run yourself too. What is on your horizon?
Well, what's kind of fun is I have taken a break from racing for about 4 years now. I ran the Gaoligong 165-kilometer race a week before Chuckanut in March of 2018 and had this kind of, mic drop moment of I'm done. And it was amazing that it stuck. like sometimes you think, oh, I don't need to do one of these again for a while or whatever when you finish a race, but then a month later you're signing up for 3 more races in the subsequent months. Yeah. And I was super confident in that moment that I'm done for a while. I was 40 years old. I've been racing for 2 decades at a pretty high level. And it just felt like I knew I always want to run, but I just didn't have that racing vibe. And it's taken, I think maybe the pandemic, to be honest, to want to try and get back to racing and see what it's like to do that in this body. So, finding a different version of what standing on a starting line looks like. I have no idea, and I'm super stoked. I am registered for the Miwok 100K.
Okay.
I got to test the waters a little bit last October at the Tiger Claw run and just had a blast and found such joy in the process of just being out there in community, running hard, challenging my body, and not really paying attention. I don't want to say I wasn't paying attention because I am aware, but just honing in on the feeling as opposed to the outcome, and just being in the running and not worried about what the finish line felt like. And it was such a gift that I'm really excited to explore that again at Miwok. I've taken these last 4 years to really get into the more adventuring side. I've always done, not always, but in the last decade, got into the FKT world and the Tahoe Rim Trail, Zion, Run Around Rainier, did a bunch of the FKT type, and now translating that out into kind of just local exploration. We ran from Fairhaven, Bellingham area, to the top of Mount Baker as one. And then in 2019, I got to run around Mount Baker, one of the only women to have ever done it. And the other woman was on the trip with me, my dear friend Kathleen Egan. So doing some cool creative adventures, looking at maps, getting excited about trails, and doing things that way. So one of those is also the Arizona Trail, and doing a section of that in April. So yeah, nice. Just kind of combining all of those worlds. And it's an evolution. I know I want running involved. How do I keep it involved in life in such a joyful way? And it seems to keep working.
And it is interesting that when you do a lot of races, then you're very focused on your training plan and on your specific date when your race is, and that sort of takes away a little bit the focus of these adventures that can be had. Of course, you can do the adventures as training too, but especially when you're exploring or trying to go for an FKT, like the Mount Baker circumnavigation, there isn't a clear trail the way there is around the Wonderland, right? So it's not just it's not something where you set out and just have a crew of 3 people and say, okay, I'm going to be a couple days or whatever, and then I'm back in Longmire, right? That requires a lot more from a planning and preparation point of view, and that sort of clashes a little bit with the direct focus on racing. So sort of have this ebb and flow, I think is exciting and gives our sport perhaps the longevity for the individuals, because we can sort of swing back and forth between those two worlds.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. And everybody's different. I've known people that have raced for decades and decades and decades and love it. And so more anybody, however you want to find that approach and it feels sustainable, I'm all about that. I needed to switch it up a bit. And to that journey around Mount Baker, we fell into a very unique and special situation. A local legend, Jeff List, had been scouting that route and had recently set the FKT on it and was game to guide John Fiddler, Kathleen Egan, and myself around it. And so took it on a more, he called it casual pace. It took us, we slept out 2 nights. So we fast packed it and slept out 2 nights. So just shy of 3 full days of doing moving and bushwhacking, and it was such a joy. Definitely an experience I wouldn't have done on my own, and some terrain that I wouldn't have felt comfortable with, or if those people hadn't been there. So a huge growth opportunity in that one.
Yeah, fantastic. It's interesting. There are a couple volcanoes where the circumnavigation has an official trail and is very obvious, and then others where it's very challenging. Mount Adams, I think, is also super. There's a couple sections which are super challenging. I think from a permit point of view too. Like you're not even officially allowed to go around Mount Adams the full way. Yeah, I think there's a big permit issue with some private land ownership or something like that. From what I've been reading, but that one's out there too. Well, awesome, Krissy. Thank you so much for your time. I am looking forward. I'm not running Chuckanut this year. I'm trying to get my wife to run it sometime. She's eyeing her first 50, and she is from the Bellingham area originally. So I said this would be one that she should be doing. Family can come out and cheer, which would make it special. So
that's how I got drug into Chuckanut as my first, for sure.
Exactly. That's how we do it. Krissy, do you want to mention links to any website or anything where our listeners? I mean, most of my listeners know you, but we list them anyway.
Oh, I appreciate that. My personal website is Krissy Moehl, if you can spell my name, .com, and that's where you can find the links to order or pre-order the second edition of my book. There's also chuckanut50krace.com for information about the upcoming event. And I am more of an Instagram person than any of the other social media platforms. And again, just Krissy Moehl, KRISSYMOEHL, and you'll find me.
Perfect. We'll have links to all of this in the show notes. Especially go check out the Chuckanut 50 website, because there you have a link to the video or of the early times for the race. I think for people who are interested in the history and want to dive in a little bit more, they can get information there. And then, of course, pre-order Krissy's book, Running Your First Ultra. It's not running your second ultra. It's running your first ultra, the second edition.
Nope.
Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to dig into Chuckanut a bit. It's something that's always going in my brain this time of year, and I don't verbalize it all the time. So it's usually buzzing around, but I don't get the opportunity to verbalize it. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you.